Fenty Beauty has been the biggest disruptor of modern-day makeup in its few years of existence. They had the biggest launch in makeup history and have been able to sustain that growth. But how? Fenty was begun in 2016 after Rihanna, who was obviously extremely famous at the time from her music, partnered with Kendo, the beauty brand incubator of LVMH, in an almost 50-50 split of the company, with LVMH technically owning very slightly more. LVMH invested 30 million euros, which is about 35 million US dollars, while Rihanna invested the same amount, 30 million euros, in-kind contributions, which means they put a value on her intangible assets like her fame and used that as capital. They based the platform of the brand on Rihanna's own personal experience with makeup, as she, as a black woman, felt like there wasn't a lot of beauty brands catering to people of color, who routinely found it hard to find a foundation or contour to match their tone, despite makeup designed for people of color existing and being profitable for over 100 years. The first of which being this Anthony Overton powder from 1898, beginning the whole POC makeup industry that even in 2016 still saw several brands with dark foundations in their collection, like NARS, Tom Ford, Illamasqua, and Bobbi Brown. However, these brands were simply not promoting or capitalizing on the inclusive range that they had, nor did they have people of color behind the brand that understood darker skin tones as undertones and textures. With further research, they too noticed that extreme pale tones also weren't being catered to, with the only other brand that at least I know of, Dainty Doll, which only catered to light tones, not mid or darker tones, being discontinued in 2013. So they had a clear gap in the market through which they could formulate their products, and at least a head start in the promotion because Rihanna was partnered in the business and obviously willing to promote the company heavily. Meaning that not only did they have bankable initial sales from her fanbase, but they would also get a much wider reach on social media because of the bankable buzz that would undoubtedly stir around the business, specifically due to Rihanna's involvement. However, as I said in the Rise and Fall of Fenty, the fashion house video that I just released on my fashion channel Understitch, her star power simply would not be enough to sell products on a consistent and long-term basis. This was not intended to be a limited time collaboration, and they seriously needed to bring longevity in the label. This would obviously come through product quality, something that took the brand 2 years to perfect. Credibility in the label as more than just a celebrity line, something that came with an incredible team of beauty industry leaders, including James Caliados as resident artist, and Priscilla Ono and Hector Espinal as global makeup artists, and a mid-level price point which would be based around inclusivity without compromising on quality, an ethos that would really come to define the Fenty brand as a whole to the public coming into the launch in 2017. Fenty was launched with a multi-channel marketing scheme that included, but was not limited to, Rihanna as celebrity endorsement, as seen in this interview with Hamish Bowles and Vogue, a cover on Elle magazine and features in many others, a series of makeup tutorial events, which I think were held in Sephora, and a launch event that was definitely held in Sephora during New York Fashion Week that coincided with her Fenty Puma New York Fashion Week show. This scheme had the goal of positioning the brand as a luxurious, fashionable product that was both desirable and yet accessible. But this was all before or at the product launch. So as Fenty revealed their initial products that included, but was not limited to, a primer, lip gloss, brushes, beauty blender, and 40 different shades of foundation that could be purchased in-store in 17 different countries or online from 137 countries, they evidenced this now infamous inclusivity as another aspect of their brand positioning. Something that made Fenty fresh and novel for their target markets at the time, proved by the fact that the darkest shade sold out first. This was then backed up by the launch of their Instagram account that, unlike other brands at the time, heavily featured people of color as much, if not more, than white models, with Fenty Beauty's first repost, which would become a large part of their marketing strategy from this point onwards, being of a hijabi woman wearing Fenty Beauty foundation, looking so incredible that consumers then rushed to their site and crashed the official website of Fenty Beauty, and then saw them gain upwards of 1.5 million Instagram followers in just the week of launch. Fenty Beauty didn't only post high-resolution pictures of their products like most companies at the time, but they mixed that in with a narrative of women empowerment and inclusivity that resonated with a lot of people. This incredibly inclusive marketing really hit home for so many people across the world who now felt represented in this fashionable, beautiful world that had been led by LVMH for so long. This caused an enormous wave of promotion from people talking about the brand on social media well before products even hit shelves, simply because they no longer felt left out. And just to be clear, I'm not only talking about Black and brown people here, but the feeling of a communal acceptance that was so evident that even if a customer could get their foundation from CoverGirl, they may want to shop Fenty because it aligned more with their own inclusivism beliefs. This was more than just Rihanna, more than a celebrity makeup line, it was all of us. Obviously, this commercial launch was unlike anything the makeup world had ever seen. It completely dominated social media for months, and it was all anybody could talk about. Within 40 days of launch, Fenty Beauty had records of sales of $100 million and was getting more orders than they could have even estimated. After the first month, they even generated more than $72 million in media value, and by October, they'd already started expanding their core product offering by having an eyeshadow palette in their holiday collection. For years, we as consumers have been told that it was too difficult for these big brands to have a wider tone range in foundation, simply because they're saying that there wasn't enough demand, or chemically, the available colors at either end of the spectrum weren't good enough. Fenty proved that wrong by capitalizing on the discussion of diversity to help people discover their perfect shade for everyone, from either the online store, Harvey Nichols in the UK, or Sephora that stocked Fenty in the other 16 available countries, though I suppose that probably goes without saying considering that LVMH owns Sephora. The pair wanted the biggest beauty launch in history, and they had the resources, the product, and the positioning to make that happen. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the company was poised for the next step. Over the last decade and a bit, we've seen brands that started off great or came into greatness like Morphe, but kind of got derailed on the way as they were unable to resolve reputational or marketing issues. And the fear with Fenty was, of course, that they would get nudged out of the space that they alone had popularized. The launch and the impact of Fenty was so overwhelming that it wasn't long before the Fenty Effect started causing other brands to change. Consumers were demanding brands to do better and be more inclusive, and they were reacting to it. Nearly all of the big names started coming out with wider skin tone ranges to try to take back some of the market share that they had lost to Fenty. And don't get me wrong, this is not a bad thing from a customer perspective. It's really good to go into a store and see a wider range of tones. But for these companies that were only now changing after they'd seen it to be profitable, it does come across as money hungry, opportunistic, and quite frankly, inauthentic. Authenticity in marketing is famously one of those things that is incredibly hard to have or to promote that you have, regardless of whether you're doing it authentically or not. But it's so important because it affects your point of view, your public image, and therefore, most importantly, your sales. It's an incredibly valuable asset for any company, and so every company wants a level of authenticity within their brand, and Fenty had managed to do it so effortlessly. This really would be the foundation, pun intended, of how the Fenty brand would continue to grow. They almost immediately switched their marketing tactics from acquisitional-based marketing to retention-based marketing and began slowly releasing products or expanding on color ranges to build a repertoire, a core product offering for their already loyal customer base. Within just 17 months of launch, the brand saw sales of $570 million and had a valuation of over $1 billion. This is an incredible feat for any company and definitely explains why so many brands did try to copy Fenty. By 2019, Fenty was already seen as a staple in the beauty industry and was successfully expanding their stockist lists across the world. It was no longer a newly launched company that people could get that feeling of buying from a startup from. It was a well-established business, and it was at the forefront of everyone's minds, but they have had to have been careful to grow that reputation by being reliable to their audience, with a slow growth strategy that directly contrasted a lot of the other makeup brands at the time who were putting out product after product, like ColourPop, who were more running on a platform of limited releases to draw hype. Fenty, by pivoting to this less hype-based, less limited release-based growth strategy, were putting in the effort to show us that they were more than just hype. They were a brand that we could rely on, that very actively didn't grow faster than they could sustain. But that didn't mean they weren't expanding. While the larger Fenty brand launched the massive failure that was the Fenty Fashion House in 2019 and Savage Fenty in 2018, Fenty Beauty added a series of highlighters to their product offering that actually did really well at first in 2018, until in March 2019, they were the cause of the brand's first controversy. They named their red highlighter Geisha Chic, and it didn't play too well to their main audience, being pulled very shortly after its announcement. Without going into too much detail, geishas in the West are quite misunderstood because of Orientalism, fetishization, and subsequent often misogynistic misrepresentation within Western media, whereas in Japan they have a totally different connotation. In Japan, especially for women, geishas are seen as a performer of art and music and are usually trendsetters, or at least historically were seen as trendsetters. So when I asked my friends living in Japan if they would be offended by this, they said no. However, that is of course not to say that it wasn't wrong for them to use the name geisha in the product, knowing that 1, they don't have any visible Japanese people on the team, 2, knowing where their main social media following comes from, i.e. the West, where issues of cultural appropriation are a very sensitive issue, and 3, knowing how much geishas have been a victim of fetishization and Orientalism in the West. So as they named these highlighters Geisha Chic, the main Fenty client found that this was disturbing and disrespectful. Fenty had promoted themselves on this idea of inclusivity and respect, so for them to overtly use another culture just for the name was seen as openly disrespecting Japanese culture. Fenty quickly pulled the product from the market. I'm pretty sure the shade was edited out of this promo video for their YouTube, though I could be wrong, and posted on Instagram that they'd removed the highlighter with an apology. This seemed to work very well and kind of resolved the issue for the company. They re-released it under the name Ruby Riches in the November of the same year 2019, and sales did keep going up from that point, even as the pandemic started to hit. For most beauty companies, the pandemic was a real crash and burn. People weren't wearing a lot of makeup because they were inside the house for the most part, and honestly, makeup just fell out of fashion, which is when we saw the rise of the natural beauty trend. Fenty was really well poised for this. They'd built this natural beauty image for themselves literally since they began, and so as the pandemic came into our lives, Fenty was growing like never before, especially on TikTok, where they now have over 1.5 million followers. Because they had a shade for almost every person, it was the most natural looking foundation on the market for so many. And so naturally, pun intended, it played perfectly into the no makeup trend and became a go-to product for a lot of people. Plus, they were already selling on their online store in 137 countries across the world, so not only was this just popular and trendy, but also accessible to people for purchase from their homes. Fenty became larger than ever and even began to expand once again with their wildly successful cream blushes, gloss bomb lip glosses, mascara, gold and rose gold highlighters. They'd already expanded their foundations to 50 shades in 2019, along with 50 concealers, and they added cream lipsticks, all to their core product offering. But to further capitalize on this, they released an eau de parfum in 2020 and Fenty Skin in 2021, both with very similar positioning to the other still existing Fenty lines, so Fenty Beauty and Savage Fenty, by which I of course mean that they're accessible luxury that's made for everyone, which for eau de parfum and Fenty Skin meant that the perfume and skin products were gender neutral. I said earlier that this was a slow, less hype-based growth strategy, and by all accounts this was not really slow. But it felt that way because they weren't releasing limited releases and they kept expanding on their core product offering in order to grow the business in a way that could build customer loyalty and trust, which by this point made Fenty Beauty a seriously well-established brand. It had brand loyalty, it had reliability, it had customers that could genuinely depend on Fenty Beauty for always carrying their shade. So now would be the perfect time to experiment to drive virality, to of course lead to a new acquisition of customers. This will be done with their viral sensation collaboration with Mischief. Mischief is a fashion company that are known for their marketing and creating products that are meant to go viral. They make pretty decent quality stuff, but it's always at the intersection of fashion and humour, like the wavy shoes, the gobstopper shoes, and the Lil Nas X Satan shoes that had his blood in it. But with Fenty, Mischief produced this collaboration of ketchup-themed makeup. Obviously, this was more to promote Mischief than it was Fenty, and I'm almost certain that this was the idea of Mischief. But that doesn't mean to say that Fenty didn't massively benefit from this. It made Fenty look more fashionable or more cool or more fun to engage with than the fairly serious inclusivism viewpoint that they have been riding on so far. This collaboration added a level of humour to the Fenty brand that certainly added to their authenticity. The product itself was like a box, like a PR kit, filled with 6 ketchup packages, some of which had ketchup in and some had the Gloss Bomb lip gloss, but there was no way to know what was inside the packaging without opening it. Obviously, this gimmick went really viral on TikTok, on YouTube, where people were trying to guess the product before they opened it, which was such an incredible amount of fun that I, much like most other people, obviously adored the marketing scheme. I absolutely wish that I could have got my hands on this because I think it's brilliant, both in conception and for the Fenty brand, who I really hope continue this collaboration again in the future for other light-hearted product launches, just to bring that element into the brand, especially in this experimental way that elevates the usual collab collections we see from other brands that are mostly just new shades or new packaging. However, something that they should definitely be wary of with these collaborations is their brand positioning. In this paper about the Fenty Effect written in 2022, they write that though Fenty is positioned as a luxury brand because of the packaging and the brand owners, the mid-tier price point and introduction to accessible stores like Ulta in the US and Boots in England could cause them to lose some of their perceived luxury positioning. Obviously, this really all happened within the last few months, and we still have time for them to combat this, perhaps with collaborations with other luxury fashion brands that don't have their own makeup line, or at least that's my suggestion. I was thinking small brands like Molly Goddard, Otterlinger, Nancy DeChaka could be good, or even bigger brands like Loewe, J.W. Anderson, or Versace, who, just as a side note, actually did once have their own makeup line, but it folded. It's 100% smart for them to start collaborating now after they've so successfully built their brand image to one that is looking to be unshakable. Effectively, now all they need to do is to keep their names in people's mouths and continue to be the reliable company that people have come to know them as, and they can't really fall from there. Though it is important to note that now Fenty is such a big name, any scandals that follow the Fenty branded line or product will have implications for the beauty skincare lines as well. A good example of this would be the t-shirts that capitalize on her football game performance that people thought were in bad taste, or maybe something else will come up in the future about Rihanna's personal life, in the same way that I'm kind of expecting it to happen for Kim Kardashian and her makeup line, to be honest. That bad feeling that celebrities or owners of brands give to us is very easily transferred to the brand itself. We saw that really clearly with Too Faced, and it definitely poses somewhat of a risk to the Fenty brand as well, though it is, I suppose, kind of true of all celebrity brands and any brand that has a visible owner, really. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for more videos like this one. Subscribe to my fashion channel here as well. And if you have some extra coins, please support on Patreon for early access to videos.